It's funny. When you've been exposed to Christian apologetics as much as someone like myself has, both as a believer and now as a skeptic, you start to see certain patterns. You start to see these different groupings of arguments. And one grouping that is so common amongst pretty much all sects of Christianity is the claim that Christianity is unique and therefore somehow true. It shows itself in many ways, whether it is, well, Christianity is the only belief that isn't about what you've done, but what someone has done for you, or Jesus, who died for us, is the only sacrificing God in history, or Jesus' death was the worst possible death that anyone could ever go through. By the way, all three of these claims so far have been false, which is the second reason that this grouping of argumentation fails. They almost never get the information correct. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing inherently or intrinsically unique about the claims of Christianity. Sure, there's also unique claims in other religions and mythologies. The greater point is obviously that they don't make your case or your assertion true just because they're special. It's additionally funny when you then in some other groupings see all of the appeals to majority for why it must be true. How Christianity has spread unlike any other religion. You just can't have this both ways, but they don't care. They'll just say anything. And I have an example of one of those anythings today that happens to be about the uniqueness of Jesus and Christianity, and it's coming from Sean McDowell, and I want to just take it apart. And you may see this as not a big issue and something that you probably knew better than, but this kind of thing works for Christian after Christian after Christian to keep them in the faith, to keep them from doubting. And like so many arguments in this grouping, it's simply not true. So let's learn a little comparative religion, let's learn a little history, let's learn a little mythology, and let's stop letting apologists just say whatever they want, thinking that everyone is just going to eat it up. Here we go.
Have you ever considered this about Jesus?
He's the only religious figure that everybody wants a piece of. No one outside of Buddhism claims Buddha except maybe New Agers. No one outside of Hinduism claims Krishna. No one outside of Islam claims Mohammed. But within Buddhists, Jesus was an enlightened one. Within Hinduism, Jesus was a kind of God or an avatar, so to speak. Within Islam, Jesus is the virgin-born, miracle-working prophet. Everybody wants Jesus on their side. So my question is not, do you have Jesus on your side? But for those watching, are you on the side of Jesus, of who he actually claimed to be?
And you know what? It sounds good, right? Like if you're just a Christian in the faith and you've been raised in this and you haven't done any study on your own, you hear this kind of thing. It's the 50th thing you've heard in the last month about why your religion is so true and perfect and why everyone else has it wrong. And then you have someone like Cliff Buell sitting there just pointing and looking impressed and surprised the whole time. I hate this stuff because it's just so factually untrue. Now, being able to disprove these points does not disprove Christianity. We are taking this an argument at a time, and I'm giving you an example of this grouping of arguments that is used so often, but still, let me tell you why this fails. The first sentence is that he is the only religious figure that everybody wants a piece of. Keep that in mind. We will come back to that as our closing argument, but unbelievably untrue. Then he starts his list, and we're mainly focusing on Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam. And we're going to be looking at two sides of each of those religions. He says no one outside of Buddhism claims Buddha, except maybe outside of New Agers. Oh, so someone does claim Buddha. You just minimize them immediately to continue to make your point. And then again, there's 2 points for each of these. So when he gets to Buddhism, he says within Buddhism, Jesus is revered as an enlightened one. Okay, so no one claims the Buddha, but even in Buddhism, people claim Jesus. This is point 1. You know where else Buddha is acknowledged? Hinduism, which is going to be another point of his, that Hinduism accepts Jesus. Yeah, but they also accept Buddha, which you didn't mention, by the way. Buddha is often considered the 9th avatar of Vishnu. And it's not a fringe view, by the way. It's part of major Hindu texts like the Bhagavata Purana. So yes, Hindus absolutely claim Buddha as a subsumed figure. And yes, to his original point, there are some forms of Buddhism that admire Jesus as an enlightened figure. Again, this is mostly in Western traditions or syncretic versions, but historically and doctrinally, Buddhism is non-theistic and sees Jesus as just another wise figure. That's not claiming him, that's being polite. which many of these philosophies and religions that are not so exclusionary like Christianity have no problem doing. That's your point for why Jesus is true? Because some philosophical branch of a certain thing you call a religion in its modern westernized version elevates Jesus as wise? Yet it was Shawn himself who said that yes, Buddha is claimed in other places, mainly New Age places, as some kind of a dismissal. That's how Jesus is claimed by Buddhists when he is claimed, and it's not as God. Do you not see the hypocrisy and the internal contradiction within Shawn's thinking here? And this is just for the Buddhism one. Let's move on to the Hinduism one. Yes, some Hindus, specifically within the New Age movements, see Jesus as an avatar. It's a largely modern reinterpretation, especially amongst Universalist or, again, the syncretic traditions of Hinduism. Doesn't even elevate him. It assimilates him. Wouldn't that be a demotion to Jesus's character? He becomes one of many. It's not special. It's polytheism. And again, just to show how misleading both sides of this coin were, Krishna, who Shawn says is not claimed anywhere else like Jesus is. The Hare Krishna movement is deeply Krishna focused, and many of its members are not Indian or even traditionally Hindu. New Age circles, which again I can't tell if they matter or don't matter in Shawn's position, will often claim Krishna as just one incarnation of Christ consciousness, seeing him and Jesus as equals. Surely that can't be what Shawn was going for. Even Sufi mystics have written about Krishna and Rama as examples of divine love. It seems that Krishna is claimed elsewhere, just like Jesus is claimed elsewhere, but neither is claimed everywhere, and this doesn't matter. But let's move on to the Islam example. Yes, Islam, another Abrahamic religion, affirms Jesus as a prophet, but it does not affirm the crucifixion, the resurrection, divine status, or the Son of God. You know, all the things Christianity needs Jesus to be, or to have done. He's respected because Islam reinterprets and reabsorbs Abrahamic figures into their version of the religion for its own framework. This is also done with Moses and Abraham and even Mary. Should we make some divine claim about them just because a sister religion absorbed them into their stories and framework? What a dumb comparison. But he must think it's special because then he also doubles down and says no one outside of Islam claims Muhammad. First of all, Muslims don't allow reinterpretations of Muhammad the way that other religions allow syncretism. But Muhammad is still discussed and respected outside of Islam. He's often recognized as a great historical figure or even moral reformer. Maybe not by other entire branches of religion, but you have people like Thomas Carlyle or Gandhi or Tolstoy that have all made reference to the inspiration of Muhammad as a great leader. He even appears in Baha'i text as one of God's manifestations. This isn't much more than what people have done for Jesus, by the way, as some wise teacher. It's like Shawn was actually literally wrong about every single statement he said. This is either utter ignorance of him, which is unacceptable as a leading apologist. He should know the religions with which he compares and claims to be false while holding up his religion as true, especially using this ridiculous argumentation of because it's different, they're all different. I could make a case for any single religion or religious individual in history. I don't care from where or what time or what part of the globe. I could tell you why it's unique and why it's special. I could denigrate the others because of those differences by cherry picking them and then make some grand case that it is directly because of that unique status that we can know this thing is true, and it wouldn't make it true because that's not how logic works. It's also incredibly myopic thinking, and worse, it's hypocritical. It's disingenuous. I don't care if it's by ignorance or by malice. Either way, it's unacceptable to make arguments like this when the information that disproves it is so readily available. And none of what he said should be surprising even if it was more factually true. Abrahamic religions often overlap. That's what happens when you all stem from the same initial source material. Eastern religions are generally non-exclusive. They tend to absorb respected figures into their own frameworks. Syncretism is common. Religions borrow, overlap, and reinterpret. That's how myths evolve. By the way, Christianity has done this so so much. Almost everything you think is unique about Christianity is straight up borrowed or lifted from an earlier tradition or influence. Remember how the video started? Jesus is the only religious figure that everybody wants a part of. Though he only goes on to list the three that we've already completely demolished, what about the rest of the world? What about the rest of the religions? All the ones that Shawn purposely had to leave out to make his horrific point act as if it holds any weight at all. All the ones who are indifferent or unaware or don't care or didn't know. Well, we can start with some of the specific Eastern traditions and religions that don't claim him at all, like Theravada Buddhism, where there is no mention or inclusion of Jesus in any of its text whatsoever at all, end of story, period. Confucianism is focused on human ethics, relationships, and proper conduct. Jesus is irrelevant. Ancient Chinese culture had no contact with Jesus or his teachings. Jesus plays no role in the Taoist thought or cosmology. Jainism rejects the idea of a creator altogether. Jesus is not mentioned in any Jain scripture. The indigenous Japanese belief system, Shintoism, is centered on kami, spirits, and ancestor worship. Jesus is again completely irrelevant here, both historically and spiritually. One of the oldest monotheistic religions or traditions is Zoroastrianism. It even has its own messianic expectations, which by the way do not include Jesus, and the religion doesn't reference or rely on Jesus in any way whatsoever. Hellenism with the ancient Greeks, the pre-Christian Roman Empire, the Norse or Celtic beliefs, the indigenous African beliefs, the Native American beliefs. And it's not just other old traditions that don't accept Jesus, there's new ones that don't. Scientology doesn't, Yazidism doesn't, Falun Gong doesn't, Unitarian Universalism doesn't. The ones that even mention him right alongside a bunch of other philosophers with maybe something to learn from a cool little story, but nothing about his divinity. Again, if you just want credit that your particular religious individual, in this case Christianity's Jesus, has made influence into other parts of the world, then you can have it. But to say that no other religious individual has, or that Jesus has everywhere, these kinds of statements are what are so unbelievably dishonest. So let's be honest, who is actually trying to claim Jesus? It's not other religions trying to co-opt Jesus. It's Christian apologists trying to shoehorn him in where he doesn't belong, to score rhetorical points and act as if it means something. That's what's happening here. They cherry pick quotes or surface level beliefs from other traditions, denying the context, and then act like it's evidence of Jesus's universal appeal. But when you actually study comparative religion or comparative mythology, you realize most religions don't claim Jesus. Most had never even heard of him. And when the ones that do mention him have anything to say, they do so stripping away the very things that Christians say matter most. His divinity, his resurrection, his identity as a savior. That's not spiritual consensus, which is what Shawn is trying to allude to. It's theological remixing, and again, something that Christianity wouldn't be here without having done itself. Jesus is not the only one this happens to. He's just the one Christians notice most. That's what this whole thing means. You need to zoom out. Christians so often live in their own tiny little perfectly sheltered bubble. They filter everything in through Jesus because they have purposely made Jesus the center of their everything, and that's fine, that's their belief, but the dangers in doing so is that you do miss the reality of the situation. And there are certain believers that will acknowledge everything I have said and say that Shawn is wrong and still maintain their faith. That's fine, but acting like because some believers are smarter than this and know better means it's not an issue is also not correct. These things are used because they appeal to the mass population that is undereducated in these fields. And that undereducation happens on purpose by Christians with the constant reinforcement of the manipulative lies like what Shawn has said in today's short. You don't get to be in the religion that purposely keeps people ignorant so it's easier for them to believe and not doubt, while you at the top may know better than some of the psychological tricks being used and act like that's okay. It's not okay. Feeding on mass bad ideas, bad arguments, bad evidence for their belief, but ones that sound good, on first listen that one would really have to do a lot of understanding and studying and researching to unpack and undo. Something the average Christian, specifically in America, is unwilling or unable to do. And they don't want to. They want to be reaffirmed and reassured of their belief. That's why apologists exist. Shawn's not trying to convince me with that horrific, stupid, and ignorant idea of an argument. He's trying to reinforce the believer who already wants to believe that. And I know it may seem unfair to reference what people comment on those videos, but look at the comments on videos like that. See what the average Christian is saying in response. They're blown away by this idea. It is such a reinforcement to their faith. They are thanking God for Shawn putting this information in front of them. But like all other arguments for the validity of Christianity, it fails upon investigation. It crumbles under the weight of truth. And for a figure like Christ, who is supposed to be the embodiment of truth, this should not exist. If this is what you have to do to get people to believe or continue to believe, there's a reason for that. It's because it doesn't stand on its own. But I'm done preaching. I think you guys get my point. This was supposed to be like a quick, here's what they said, here's what's wrong. But thanks for sticking with me. I'll see you Thursday for a new episode of Thinking Thursday. And until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Alexander, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn; my Humanist heroes, Criagh, James, Jared, Christy, and Matthew; my atheist advocates, Caleb, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.